Amy had spent exactly 9 minutes dissecting the fraudulent contract that sold her to a mafia boss before Andrew Rossi appeared in the doorway, and the moment his dark eyes found hers across the conference room, she understood that surviving him would require more than spreadsheets. The air pressure changed first. Her stepfather's lawyer stopped mid-sentence, pen frozen over his legal pad. The accountant beside him straightened so abruptly his water glass nearly toppled. Even her stepsister Claire, who'd been shooting Amy smug, victorious glances from across the polished table, went still, her carefully applied lipstick suddenly too bright against her draining complexion. Then Andrew Rossi stepped fully into the room. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of controlled grace that came from knowing every eye was on him and not caring. The charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, expensive enough to fund a year of her college tuition, but it was the tattoos that caught her attention. Intricate black ink crawling up his neck from beneath his crisp white collar, disappearing at his jawline. One hand bore a compass rose across the knuckles. The other, a design she couldn't quite make out. But it wasn't the ink or the suit that made Amy's pulse spike. It was the way he scanned the room, methodical, assessing, cataloging every person, every document, every potential threat or asset in the span of 3 seconds. Her heartbeat kicked against her ribs. Heat climbed her neck despite the air conditioning. She hated that her body reacted before her brain could catch up, hated that some primal part of her recognized danger and couldn't decide whether to run toward it or away. But Amy kept her hands flat on the contract in front of her, kept her spine straight, kept her expression neutral the way she'd learned to do during countless humiliating family dinners where her stepfather reminded everyone she was there out of charity. Andrew's gaze swept across the table and stopped on her. Held. Everything in Amy's body screamed to look down, to make herself smaller, to fade into the background the way she'd perfected over 3 years of being the invisible analyst in her stepfather's company. But she'd just spent 9 minutes staring at a debt schedule that didn't match any ledger she'd ever seen, at loan documents with dates that predated her stepfather's business partnership, at signatures that were close but not quite right. And something stubborn, something that had been buried under years of being dismissed and overlooked, refused to let her flinch. "Amy Carter," Andrew said. His voice was low, controlled, textured like smoke and stone. Not a question, a confirmation. An acknowledgement that he knew exactly who she was and what he'd come to collect. "Yes," she said, grateful her voice came out steady. He moved into the room with 2 men flanking him, both in dark suits, both carrying themselves like weapons. But Amy couldn't focus on them. Andrew Rossi commanded every inch of available space, every molecule of oxygen. "You've reviewed the terms," he said. "Not a question." "I've reviewed a document," Amy corrected, keeping her tone even clinical. "One that was presented to me 17 minutes ago as if I should have been expecting it." His eyebrow lifted fractionally, the only indication he'd registered her defiance. "And," he prompted. Amy lifted the contract, angling it so the overhead lights caught the ink. Her hand didn't shake, though it cost her to keep it that way. "This claims my stepfather owes your organization 1.2 million euros stemming from a business loan initiated 14 months ago," she said, her analyst brain taking over, the part of her that could strip emotion from numbers and see only patterns. "But the original partnership agreement between you and Richard Carter was signed 18 months ago, and the payment schedule here doesn't match the terms documented in your own incorporation filings." Silence crashed into the room. "Amy," her stepfather's voice cracked from the head of the table. He looked grayer than he had that morning, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for his coffee. Just don't make this worse. Worse than being sold to settle a debt that doesn't exist." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but Amy didn't take her eyes off Andrew. "Papa, the dates don't match. The interest calculations are off. And the signature authenticating the collateral amendment." She turned the document toward the light, revealing the ink's telltale sheen. "Is fresh. Less than 6 hours old. Someone wrote this today and backdated it." Andrew's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the way he held himself, like a predator recognizing unexpected prey. He glanced at the man to his left, the one with cold eyes and a scar bisecting his eyebrow. "Marcus." The man stepped forward, took the contract from Amy's hands. His fingers brushed hers, brief, impersonal contact, but she felt Andrew's attention sharpen on that single point of touch like the edge of a blade. Marcus studied the document for 15 seconds, his jaw tightening. She's right. Ink's fresh. And the signature loop on the C in Carter doesn't match the original contract from last year. That one has a closed curve. This one's open. Andrew's gaze cut to Amy's stepsister. Claire went white. This is insane. Dad signed it. I watched him. You didn't, Amy said quietly, watching the micro-expressions she'd learned to read after years of navigating a household where Claire and her mother treated her like an inconvenient obstacle. Guilt flickered behind the indignation. Panic beneath the performance. You needed someone to pay Andrew's collateral because of what happened with the shipment last week. The one that went missing from the docks. What shipment? Andrew's voice dropped lower, and somehow that made it more dangerous. Amy's mouth went dry, but she forced herself to continue. The manifest irregularities I flagged in Tuesday's logistics report. 3 containers logged under Carter import codes. But the weights were off and the customs stamps didn't match our usual processor. I sent the report to Richard, but it never reached me, Andrew finished. His gaze swung back to Amy's stepfather. Because someone intercepted it. Richard Carter looked like he might be sick. I didn't know. Andrew, I swear I didn't. Then who did? The question hung in the air like a noose. Amy didn't have the answer. Not yet. But she could see the shape of it forming. The careful setup, the manufactured debt, the too convenient timing. I don't know, she said, meeting Andrew's eyes even though her pulse was screaming in her ears. But if you give me access to the shipping logs, the financial records, and the personnel files for the last 6 months, I can map it. I can find out who's stealing from you. Andrew tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. And why would I trust you to do that? Because if you actually believed my stepfather betrayed you, we wouldn't be having this conversation, Amy said, her voice steadier than she felt. We'd already be dead. The silence that followed was absolute. Her stepfather made a small, broken sound. Claire looked like she might bolt. The lawyer had gone very still, pen abandoned. Andrew Rossi studied Amy for what felt like an eternity. Assessing, calculating, weighing risk against potential reward. Then slowly, deliberately, he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who'd just found something unexpected and was deciding whether to keep it or break it. You're either very brave or very foolish, he said softly. I'm very good with numbers, Amy replied. And right now, the numbers say someone in your organization has been using my stepfather's company as cover for months. If you want to find them before they steal anything else, you need me. Andrew's smile widened fractionally, and Amy realized with a jolt of fear and something else, something she absolutely could not afford to name, that she'd just negotiated her way deeper into his world instead of out of it. All right, Amy Carter, Andrew said, his voice dropping to something almost intimate despite the audience. Let's talk terms. If this story has you hooked already, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because what happens next will leave you speechless. 3 years ago, when Amy's mother married Richard Carter, she'd thought the biggest challenge would be adjusting to a new last name and a stepsister who resented her existence. She'd had no idea that her talent for spotting discrepancies in spreadsheets would one day make her valuable to a man like Andrew Rossi, or that value, in his world, came with a price written in blood and binding contracts. The marriage contract hit the conference table at 9:47 a.m., landing in front of Amy with the finality of a judge's gavel. Mr. Rossi has been extraordinarily generous, the lawyer said, his manicured fingers smoothing the pages flat. Gerald Hoffman had the kind of practiced smile that made Amy's skin crawl. Too many teeth, not enough sincerity. Given the circumstances, most men in his position would have chosen a far less civilized resolution. Amy's mother clutched her younger brother's shoulder from across the table, her knuckles white against his blazer. Daniel was 16 and looked terrified, his usual teenage bravado stripped away by 2 hours of watching their stepfather crumble under the weight of men in expensive suits. Sign it, Amy, Richard Carter said quietly, not meeting her eyes. Please, just sign it and this ends. But Amy had stopped listening the moment her eyes landed on page 3. The repayment schedule claimed monthly interest accruals that would have required Richard's company to be operating at 3 times its actual revenue. The loan origination date predated his partnership with Rossi by 4 months, a partnership she'd helped set up, whose incorporation documents she'd personally filed. These numbers are wrong, she said. Hoffman's smile tightened. Ms. Carter, I understand this is emotional, but the accounting has been thoroughly. The cash flow doesn't support this debt level, Amy continued, flipping to the loan schedule. Richard's logistics operation grossed €840,000 last year. This contract claims he borrowed €1.2 million 14 months ago at 18% interest. The monthly payments alone would have bankrupted the company by June. Amy, for God's sake, Richard started. The door opened. Andrew Rossi walked in like he owned not just the room, but the air inside it, and Amy's carefully constructed composure fractured at the edges. Up close, he was devastating. Sharp jaw, dark eyes that missed nothing, and those tattoos winding up his neck like promises written in ink. His presence made the spacious conference room feel claustrophobic. Interesting observation, Andrew said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade through silk. He moved to the head of the table, his 2 guards flanking the door. Most people don't read contracts before signing their lives away. I'm not most people, Amy said, hating how breathless she sounded. His mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. No, you're not. He gestured to Marcus, who produced a tablet and slid it across the table. Financial records scrolled across the screen. Shipping manifests, account transfers, customs declarations. You want to see the real numbers? Andrew asked. Here they are. 3 months of missing inventory. 6 fraudulent shipments. Approximately €400,000 in stolen merchandise, all traced back to Carter import credentials. Amy's stomach dropped, but she forced herself to scan the documents. The pattern was there, subtle, methodical, designed to look like Richard's incompetence rather than someone else's theft. Someone's setting him up, she said. Prove it. The challenge hung between them, electric and dangerous. Amy lifted her chin. I will, but not for free. I want protection for my mother and brother. Real protection, not threats disguised as generosity. I want full access to your financial systems and personnel records. And I want boundaries written into whatever arrangement we're making here. Andrew's eyes gleamed with something that might have been respect. Boundaries. This is business, Amy said, her heart hammering. I'll find your thief and clear Richard's name. But I'm not property. For a long moment, Andrew simply studied her, and Amy felt the weight of that attention like a physical touch. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out a pen, and added 3 handwritten clauses to the bottom of the contract. Sign it, he said softly, and we have a deal. Amy's hand trembled only slightly as she took the pen. She was walking into the fire, but at least this time, she was negotiating the terms of how she'd burn. The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building that didn't officially exist on any city registry, and Amy understood within the first 5 minutes that luxury was just another word for control. Marcus led her through corridors lined with abstract art that probably cost more than her college education, past doors that required fingerprint scanners and retinal verification. Cameras tracked their movement from corners she wasn't supposed to notice, but did anyway. The air smelled like expensive leather and something else. Gun oil, maybe, or the particular tension that came from armed men standing very still behind closed doors. You're sweet, Marcus said, opening double doors onto a space 3 times the size of her childhood bedroom. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, the lights spreading out like scattered diamonds against black velvet. The furniture was modern, minimalist, beautiful in the way dangerous things often were. A new phone sat on the nightstand, sleek, black, with exactly 1 contact programmed in. Mr. Rossi will expect you downstairs in 2 hours, Marcus continued, his expression unreadable. The officiant arrives at 7. Amy's throat tightened. Tonight, Mr. Rossi doesn't wait, once he's made a decision. Marcus moved toward the door, paused. The cameras don't reach the bathroom or bedroom. Everywhere else, someone's watching. Get used to it. The wedding took place in Andrew's private study at exactly 7 o'clock, witnessed by Gerald Hoffman and Marcus, who stood near the door like a well-dressed sentinel. The officiant was a nervous man who rushed through the vows as if afraid lingering too long might have consequences. Andrew slid a platinum band onto Amy's finger. Perfectly sized, clearly prepared in advance, and the weight of it felt less like jewelry and more like a tracking device. You may kiss the bride, the officiant said, already gathering his papers. Andrew's hand found Amy's jaw, tilting her face up with surprising gentleness. But instead of her lips, he pressed his mouth to her forehead, brief, chaste, deliberate. When he pulled back, His eyes held a warning she couldn't quite decipher. "Done," he said quietly, and the officiant fled. Hoffman produced documents, marriage certificates, legal amendments, transfer authorizations that made Amy's access to the financial systems official. She signed where he indicated, her new name looking foreign on the pages. Amy Rossi. When they were alone, Andrew poured 2 glasses of something amber and handed her one. "To new partnerships," he said, the words carrying weight that had nothing to do with matrimony. Amy took the glass but didn't drink. "What happens now?" "Now you prove you're as smart as you claim." Andrew moved to his desk, unlocked a drawer, and withdrew a tablet. "Full access to shipping records, personnel files, and financial transactions for the last 18 months. Everything you asked for." He set it on the desk, between them like a test. "And the boundaries?" Amy asked, hating how her voice wavered slightly. Andrew's gaze held hers, dark and assessing. "Your bedroom is yours. I won't cross that threshold unless invited. But understand something, Amy. In public, we're convincing. In front of my people, you're mine. Completely. Anything less makes us both vulnerable. And if I find who's stealing from you, then your family walks away clean, and you get to renegotiate our arrangement." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. "But if you lie to me, if you betray me even once, those boundaries disappear. Along with everyone you love." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise delivered in a voice like smoke and stone. Amy took the tablet, her fingers steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "Then I won't lie." Andrew smiled, that dangerous, not quite kind expression she was beginning to recognize. "Good. Because this world eats the weak, Mrs. Rossi. And I need to know which one you are." Amy met his gaze and didn't flinch. "So do I." Amy worked through the night, the tablet's blue glow painting her sweet in cold light as the city beyond her windows slowly emptied of life. The financial systems Andrew had given her access to were sophisticated. Layered security protocols, encrypted databases, transaction logs that required 3 different authentication methods to access. But numbers didn't lie, and Amy had built a career on finding the stories they told when no one else was looking. The first discrepancy appeared at 2:47 a.m. A shipment log through Carter Import on March 15th showed a customs weight of 2,847 kilograms, but the receiving warehouse recorded 2,831. 16 kilograms missing, barely noticeable, easily dismissed as measurement error or documentation lag. Except the same differential appeared again on April 3rd and April 29th, and every 2 weeks after that, always between 14 and 18 kilograms, always on shipments routed through Richard's credentials. Amy created a spreadsheet, mapping the pattern across 6 months. The thefts were surgical, small enough to avoid triggering automatic audits, consistent enough to accumulate into serious money. Whoever was doing this understood Andrew's systems intimately and knew exactly where the surveillance gaps were. But it was the financial trail that made her stomach drop. The missing inventory wasn't being sold through normal channels. Instead, the value was being funneled through a series of shell companies, legitimate-looking businesses with plausible transactions that, when traced backward, connected to offshore accounts. And buried in those account numbers was a pattern she recognized. The same routing structure used to manufacture Richard's fraudulent debt. Someone had built Richard's loan, using the exact same architecture they'd used to steal from Andrew. Amy's hands trembled as she cross-referenced personnel files with shipment access logs. 3 names appeared consistently across the suspicious transactions. 2 warehouse supervisors and 1 logistics coordinator, all hired within the last 18 months. All 3 reported to the same operations manager, Victor Russo, Andrew's second-in-command for East Coast distribution. She reached for her phone to call her mother, needing to hear her voice, to confirm Daniel was safe. The call failed. Amy tried again. Nothing, no signal, no network, just empty digital silence. Panic clawed up her throat. She moved to the window, checking the signal bars, but they remained stubbornly absent. She tried the landline on the nightstand, but the dial tone was dead. Every minute she spends in spreadsheets is a minute someone could use against them. Amy ran for the door, her bare feet silent on marble floors. The corridor was empty, cameras tracking her movement as she headed for the elevator. But when she pressed the call button, nothing happened. The panel was dark, the entire system offline. She was trapped. Amy forced herself to breathe, to think. The signal loss wasn't random. It had happened the moment she'd accessed Victor Russo's personnel file. Someone was watching her dig through Andrew's systems and had just sent a message. "We see you." A door opened behind her. Amy spun, heart hammering. Andrew stood in the corridor, dressed in sleep pants and nothing else, his tattooed torso a map of violence and survival in the dim emergency lighting. He held a phone in one hand, his expression unreadable. "Communications blackout," he said calmly, as if this happened regularly. "Someone cut our external lines 3 minutes ago." "My family," Amy started, "are fine. Marcus is already on site at the safe house." Andrew moved closer, his presence somehow steadying despite the chaos. "What did you find that made someone this nervous?" Amy met his eyes and told him exactly who was stealing his empire. The shell companies all sounded harmless. That was the first red flag. Sunnyline Trading, Northbridge Consulting, Meridian Wellness Imports. On paper, they were exactly the kind of bland entities accountants forgot about until tax season. In the registry, they shared nothing obvious. Different directors, different addresses, different stated purposes. But in the transaction logs Amy had been peeling apart for hours, they moved like parts of the same organism. Money left Andrew's legitimate fronts as service fees or consulting retainers, skimmed from those micro-discrepancies she'd mapped, then flowed into the shells in neat, rounded amounts. From there, the trail vanished into offshore banks Andrew didn't own and couldn't see. That, more than anything, told her this wasn't carelessness, it was design. She pulled the incorporation filings next, fingers flying over the keyboard. Dates. All within the last 11 months. Legal representative. Different on each, but the drafting attorney listed on the original paperwork was the same. Carlo De Luca. Andrew's consigliera. Amy stared at the screen, pulse ticking in her throat. It could have been coincidence. Big syndicates use the same lawyers for everything. Contracts, mergers, shells meant to hide assets from regulators. But coincidence didn't explain the language. She opened one filing, then another, then one of the contracts Gerald Hoffman had shown her during the generous offer meeting. A phrase jumped out in cold, precise legalese. Notwithstanding any prior understanding between the parties. The exact wording appeared in all 3 documents, down to the misplaced comma before provided that. Amy brought up the marriage contract. The same phrase sat there, like a signature in text form. Her stomach turned. Signatures could be forged. Phrasing was harder to fake. People wrote like themselves, especially when they thought no one was paying attention. By the time she realized she'd left her suite, she was already outside Andrew's study, barefoot in an oversized t-shirt, tablet clutched to her chest. The door was closed, light leaking from beneath it. She knocked once and didn't wait. Andrew looked up from behind his desk, hair mussed, shirt open at the throat, a half-empty glass beside a stack of files. For a second, irritation flashed across his face at the intrusion. Then he saw her expression and the tablet in her hands, and it shifted into something sharper. "This better be important," he said. "It is." Her voice came out hoarse. "Your consigliera is laundering money out of your own companies, and he used my family as the fall guys." Silence dropped like a stone. Amy crossed the room and laid the tablet on his desk, pulling up the filings, the mirrored phrases, the timelines. She walked him through each connection. The shells, the dates, the identical legal language, the routing architecture that matched her stepfather's manufactured debt. Andrew listened without interrupting, jaw clenched, eyes moving from screen to screen. The muscle in his cheek jumped. "Careful," he said finally, voice low. "Accusing Carlo of treachery in my office is not a casual choice." "It's not a choice at all," Amy shot back. "It's math. This is his language. His filings. His network. Either he's in on it, or someone with his clearance has been impersonating him for a year. Which one scares you more?" His gaze snapped to hers, dark and furious. "You think you're the first person to come into my life and tell me who I should and shouldn't trust. I think I'm the first one with proof who doesn't benefit from lying to you," she said. "If Carlo's clean, I've just wasted a few hours and you can lock me in a room and throw away the key. If he's not, he's been bleeding you and framing my family in the process. So maybe get over yourself and look at the numbers." The words were out before she could swallow them back. Fear hit a second later. Too late to help. Andrew stood, the chair rolling back, the space between them collapsing with each step he took. Up close, the tattoos at his throat were a dark, coiled warning. His anger was a tangible thing, wrapping around them both. "You don't get to talk to me like that," he said softly. "Not in this house." "Then throw me out," she whispered. "Or look at the screen." For a heartbeat, she thought he'd choose the first option. His hand came up, fingers brushing her jaw. Not rough, not gentle, just there, holding her in place. Heat shot through her at the contact, betrayal and attraction tangling in her chest. "This world," he said, eyes burning into hers, "runs on loyalty. On the people who've stood beside you long before some woman with a spreadsheet and a death wish shows up and starts rearranging the furniture. And this scheme," she replied, forcing herself not to lean into his touch, "runs on your blind spot. On the fact that you'd rather protect your inner circle than admit someone close to you is cutting you open." His thumb dragged once along her cheekbone, a rough, conflicted caress. "You're playing a dangerous game, Amy." "So are you." Her breath hitched. "The difference is, I'm trying to help you win it." The tension snapped taut between them. Anger, fear, and something hotter threading through the air. He was close enough now that she could see the fatigue around his eyes, the fine lines the world didn't get to notice. Close enough that she could feel the steady thud of his heartbeat where their bodies almost touched. "If you're wrong," he murmured, "I destroy a man who's been with me since before you learned what compound interest was." "And if I'm right?" she asked. His hand slid from her jaw to the back of her neck, fingers tangling in her hair, not quite pulling her in, not quite letting her go. "Then I have to admit," he said, voice raw, "that the first person I've let this close in years walked straight into my house and showed me how stupid I've been." Her pulse roared. The space between their mouths shrank to a breath. For a suspended second, Amy didn't know if he was going to kiss her or push her away. "Andrew," she whispered. He closed his eyes, like the sound of his name on her lips hurt. "Numbers don't lie," she added. When he opened them again, the fury was still there, but so was something that terrified her more than his temper. Trust trying to be born. "Then we follow them," he said, finally releasing her. "All the way to the end. And when we get there, Amy, I'm going to remember exactly who put the knife in my hand." She exhaled, shaky, half relieved and half grieving the contact he'd taken away. "Good," she said, "because I'm not letting you pretend this was an accident." The moment of almost intimacy hung between them as he turned back to the desk, shoulders tight, eyes on the glowing screen. For the first time, Amy realized that the line between weapon and partner was razor thin. And tonight, they were both standing on it. Dawn turned the city the color of old bruises as the car rolled out of the underground garage and toward the docks. Amy sat in the back seat beside Marcus, the leather cool against her palms where she gripped it a little too tightly. He drove himself, which she'd learned meant Andrew was taking the situation seriously. "Records facility isn't on any public map," Marcus said without looking at her. "You don't wander. You don't talk to anyone you don't have to. You get what you need, we leave." "Is that your way of saying you're worried about me?" she asked. "That's my way of saying if something happens to you, I'm the one Rossi buries first." The administrative building sat back from the actual docks, a squat concrete block with tinted windows and a view of cranes and stacked containers. Inside, the air smelled like dust and ink and the faint chemical tang of old toner. A single guard checked their IDs, eyes flicking to Marcus's face before turning suddenly respectful. "Records room is in the basement," Marcus said. "I'll stay by the door." The room itself was a maze of metal shelves and battered file cabinets, rows of paper manifests and ledger books stretching into fluorescent-lit sameness. Amy's shoulders dropped a fraction. Numbers on screens could be altered with a keystroke. Paper told the truth more reluctantly, but it told it. She pulled manifests for the shipments she'd flagged, dates, container IDs, destinations, and started cross-checking. On the third file, she found it, a photocopied manifest with a yellow sticky note attached. "Route confirmed. Offload at Pier 7 midnight. Difference cleared on arrival. V." The V could have been anyone, but the manifest itself told the rest of the story. The official destination was a bonded warehouse in the city. The handwritten note listed a different stop, one not mentioned in any of Andrew's digital logs. A ghost pier. She found another note on a manifest from a month earlier. Different route, same neat handwriting. Driver briefed. Extra weight removed before inspection. Quiet theft baked into the schedule. She photographed everything, angles wide enough to capture the context, close enough to show the loops and slant of the pen. Her phone felt heavier with each image she added. "We're done," she said finally, slipping the last file back into place. They weren't. 3 men waited just outside the records room door, blocking the narrow hallway. Not dock workers, too clean, wrong posture. One had a broken nose that had healed badly. Another wore a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, Marcus," the one in the middle said. "Boss keeping you busy?" "Facilities restricted, Leo," Marcus replied, his body shifting just enough to put himself between Amy and the men. "You know the rules." Leo's gaze slid past him to Amy. It lingered a beat too long. "Heard Rossi's got himself a new wife. Didn't realize he was sharing her with the filing cabinets." Amy kept her face neutral, pulse loud in her ears. "We're leaving," Marcus said. Leo lifted both hands, all wounded innocence. "Relax. We just wanted to pass along a message." His eyes cut back to Amy. "You got family, Mrs. Rossi?" She didn't answer. That was answer enough. "Kid brother, right?" he continued. 16. Plays basketball in that busted park on 23rd. Clumsy kid. Could trip, hit his head, wrong night, wrong crowd. He snapped his fingers softly. Accidents happen. Marcus's hand moved inside his jacket. Leo's friend straightened, the temperature in the hallway dropping 10 degrees. "Think very carefully about your next sentence," Marcus said. Leo shrugged, grin back in place. "Just saying. Maybe the missus stops sticking her nose in places it doesn't belong, and the universe stops being so unfortunate." His gaze sharpened. "Tell Rossi his enemies are tired of paperwork. Next time, the warning won't be on a hallway." They peeled off as casually as they'd arrived, disappearing around the corner like they had all the time in the world. In the car, Amy's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She didn't realize she'd dialed until the ringing hit her ear. Her mother answered on the 4th ring, voice thin. "Amy, what happened?" A beat of silence. Then, "He's okay." They said it was a mugging. Some boys grabbed Daniel's backpack, pushed him down. The doctors say he's just bruised. But one of them called him Little Carter before they ran. Amy closed her eyes, every muscle in her body going cold. "They knew who he was," her mother whispered. This wasn't random. Amy's gaze slid to the docs receding in the side mirror, to Marcus's reflection watching her from the rear view. The message was carved into her bones now. Her investigation wasn't just about numbers anymore. Someone had drawn a target on her family, and every page she turned made the bullseye burn brighter. The dining room looked like the kind of place where peace treaties were signed and wars quietly declared. A single long table, polished to a mirror shine, ran the length of the room. Gold sconces threw warm light over crystal glasses and white linen, softening nothing. Men in dark suits and women in discreet jewelry took their seats with the choreography of people who understood that position mattered as much as food. Andrew pulled out Amy's chair at his right hand, a gesture that looked old-fashioned and chivalrous until she remembered he was also placing her squarely in everyone's line of sight. When she sat, his hand rested for a brief second on the back of her neck, light, proprietary, a quiet announcement that might as well have been shouted. Conversations shifted. Heads turned. Assessments began. On Andrew's left sat Carlo DeLuca, the consigliere whose phrasing she'd traced through a network of thefts and shells. 2 seats down, Victor Russo lounged like he'd grown from the leather itself, the rival underboss whose people had just threatened her brother. They didn't look at each other, which told her more than if they had. "Gentlemen," Andrew said, lifting his glass, "thank you for coming. It's been a complicated quarter. I thought a night of civility might be useful." There were polite chuckles, murmurings of agreement. Under the table, his hand slid to her knee, his thumb tracing one slow circle. To anyone watching, they looked like a powerful man and his new wife, comfortable with each other's touch. To Amy, it was code, eyes up. "Pay attention." Carlo turned first, his smile smooth. "Mrs. Rossi, it's good to see you under calmer circumstances." "You mean when I'm not pointing out flaws in your paperwork?" she asked lightly. A few of the men laughed. Carlo's eyes cooled by a degree. Victor leaned forward, wine glass loose in his hand. "We were all very impressed, you know. Most women in your position would be grateful just to sit at this table. You come in auditing our friend's empire like it's your personal homework assignment." "If the numbers didn't want attention," Amy said, cutting her meat with careful precision, "they shouldn't misbehave." "And yet," Carlo drawled, "the numbers you're most interested in all seem to start where your stepfather's honesty ends." Funny coincidence. Andrew's thumb pressed more firmly into her leg. A warning or support, she couldn't tell. Amy set down her knife and looked directly at Carlo. I'm interested in any numbers that don't add up. Some of them happen to pass through Carter Import. Some of them don't. For example, Meridian Wellness Imports. Formed 11 months ago, 3 different subsidiaries, no physical offices, but somehow collecting 6-figure consulting fees from Andrew's legitimate fronts. The room stilled. She took a sip of wine, letting the silence stretch. Most people wouldn't notice that. The shell is clean, the transfers are spaced out. But the registration language is identical to 3 other entities pulling from similar accounts. Same clauses. Same misplaced comma. It's almost like whoever drafted them got lazy. Carlo's smile didn't move, but his hand tightened around his fork. Careful, Signora, Victor said, though the amusement in his tone had thinned. Insinuating incompetence in this company can be dangerous. I'm not insinuating anything, Amy replied. I'm stating facts. If there's an innocent explanation, I'm happy to hear it. No one offered one. Andrew raised his glass again, cutting through the tension. You see why I married her, he said, voice edged with a humor that didn't reach his eyes. She notices what others miss. Some of the men laughed, less comfortably this time. Amy felt their gazes recalibrate, shifting her from naive ornament to potential threat. Andrew had wanted them to underestimate her. Tonight, he deliberately destroyed that illusion. After dinner, he guided her to a smaller sitting room just off the hall, hand at the small of her back, the door closing with a muted click behind them. The noise of the dining room dimmed to a low murmur. He poured 2 drinks, set them on the table, and didn't sit. You enjoyed that, he said. I enjoyed watching them realize I'm not here to smile and nod. He studied her, jacket undone, tie loosened, the sharp lines of his face softened only by exhaustion. I've been monitoring communications for weeks, he said. Encrypted channels between certain ports, late-night calls bouncing through 3 countries before landing back in this city. I knew someone was moving pieces behind my back. Tonight just confirmed who feels nervous. Carlo and Victor, she said. And 2 captains who suddenly can't look me in the eye. He dragged a hand over his jaw. I've been trying to believe this was external pressure. Law enforcement. Rivals from out of town. It's easier to imagine the enemy across the river than at your own table. Amy set her tablet on the low table, thumb unlocking the screen. The structural map she'd built glowed to life. Lines and arrows tracing how money bled out of Andrew's businesses into shells, then into offshore accounts, then into assets she suspected were being stockpiled for a power grab. This is your empire, she said quietly, and this is how they've been hollowing it out from the inside. He came around the table, leaning over her shoulder. She pointed out the nodes, Meridian, Sunnyline, Northbridge, and how each tied back to ports Victor controlled and contracts Carlo drafted. No embellishment, no dramatics. Just the brutal story the numbers told. When she finished, he was very, very still. If this is accurate, he said, they're not just stealing. They're building a war chest. For when they decide you're a liability, she said. Or when they're ready to convince everyone that you are. His hand landed on the back of the couch, inches from her shoulder, fingers digging into the leather. You realize what you're asking me to do. To accept that the man who's been at my side for 15 years is sharpening knives behind my back. I'm not asking you to accept anything, Amy replied. I'm asking you to see. After that, you decide. He looked down at her then, and there was none of his usual armor in his expression. Just raw calculation and something like reluctant hope. I keep waiting for the moment you prove you're playing me, he said. Because if you are, you're very good at it. If I wanted you dead, she said, I wouldn't be showing you where the bullets are coming from. Silence stretched, heavy and intimate. Finally, he exhaled. I don't like needing anyone, he admitted. But if these numbers are right, and I think they are, I'm running out of people I can trust. His hand brushed her shoulder, a touch so light she might have imagined it. Which means, he added, that trusting you might be the only way I walk out of this alive. Amy met his gaze and didn't flinch. Then we'd better make sure the math is on our side. The footage played on a loop in Amy's head long after the tablet screen went dark. A hospital corridor. Fluorescent lights. Her mother in a wheelchair, robe pulled tight around her, confusion written across her face. 2 men in orderly uniforms flanking her. Badges clipped to their pockets, paperwork in hand, calm and efficient as they steered her toward a side exit. The nurse at the station frowned, checked something on her monitor, then stood abruptly, calling after them. One of the men didn't even turn, just pushed faster. Then Andrew's security rounded the corner. The image froze on Marcus's face, all controlled fury as he stepped between the wheelchair and the exit, hand already on his weapon. The orderlies hesitated a split second too long. That was all it took. The feed cut just before the violence started. Amy shoved the tablet back across Andrew's desk, fingers shaking. "Turn it off." "It already is," he said quietly. They were in his office. The city spread out in glittering silence beyond the windows. Andrew had waited until Marcus confirmed her mother was safe before calling Amy in. That was the only reason he wasn't bleeding on the floor. "They forged my signature," he went on. "Authorization for transfer to a private clinic outside the city. The paperwork went through the hospital's system an hour before my people intercepted them." "An hour?" Her voice came out raw. "You're telling me for 60 minutes they were rolling my mother toward a car, toward God knows where, and you had a team already on site because we've been expecting this," he cut in. "Leo's little speech about your brother wasn't a bluff. I tripled security after the mugging and notified the facility that no transfers happen without direct confirmation from me. And they still almost took her." Amy paced away from the desk, hands digging into her hair. "Do you understand what that looks like from where I'm standing? Your enemies walked into a secure building with forged documents bearing your name and nearly stole my mother. And I'm supposed to what? Be grateful they didn't make it to the parking lot." His jaw tightened. "You should be furious." "I am." "Furious doesn't fix it." She spun back toward him. "You promised they were safe. That was the deal. My life for their protection. If they can't walk down a hallway without being snatched, what exactly did I sign up for?" He didn't shout back. That unnerved her more than rage would have. Andrew leaned forward, palms flat on the desk, eyes dark and steady. "You signed up for a war that was already happening," he said. "I didn't start it, but I am going to finish it. And today they crossed a line I will not forgive." He tapped the tablet, bringing up a different screen. Bank accounts, property lists, communication logs. The volume of information made her blink. "What is this?" she asked. "Everything," he said. "Every asset I control, every shell you haven't seen yet, every off-the-books account I swore no one but Carlo and I knew about. You wanted to see the whole board? Congratulations. You just earned it." She stared at him. "You're giving me deeper access because they almost kidnapped my mother?" "I'm giving you deeper access because they touched something that belongs to you," he said, voice low. "And because they did it through me. That's on my head. I can hit back on the streets. I can make bodies disappear. What I can't do is see the patterns the way you do. Not like this." It was the closest he'd come to admitting a flaw. It hit harder than any apology. Amy swallowed, anger and something more complicated knotting in her chest. "You think more passwords are going to make this feel better?" "No," he said. "But they'll make us more dangerous." He came around the desk, stopping a breath away. The familiar scent of his cologne clung to the air, clean, sharp, threaded with smoke. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small black device, and pressed it into her hand. "Encrypted line," he said. "Direct to me. No intermediaries, no logs. If anything feels wrong, anything, you use this. I don't care if it's 3 a.m. Her fingers curled around it before she could stop them. "You're still the reason they're in the crosshairs. And now I'm the shield they have," he said. "That's how this works, Amy. They went after your mother because they think you're leverage. They think you'll break, or that I will, if they push hard enough." His eyes burned into hers. "They're wrong." For a moment, neither of them moved. The anger between them had changed shape. Less wild, more focused, like heat channeled into a single point. "I saw Marcus on that video," she said quietly. "He looked like he was one wrong second away from killing them in the hallway." "He wanted to," Andrew replied. "I stopped him. I need them talking for a little while longer. But when I'm done, there won't be enough left of whoever signed off on that transfer to scrape off the pavement." "Brutal efficiency," she murmured. "That's what I was afraid of." "That's what keeps you breathing," he countered. "You don't have to like it. You just have to understand it." Her shoulders sagged. The fight bled out of her, leaving behind exhaustion and a hollow, burning resolve. "I can map the forged authorizations," she said. "Hospital systems, insurance codes, digital signatures. If they faked your clearance once, they've done it before. We follow those, we find the access points they're using." "Good," he said. "Do it." He reached for her then, hesitating a fraction of a second before his hand settled at the back of her neck, thumb brushing the tense muscles there. It wasn't a seduction. It was an anchor. I'm not letting them touch your family again, he said. Not while I'm still standing. And if you fall? She asked. His grip tightened, just enough to make her meet his gaze. Then you make sure they regret not killing me the first time. A laugh broke out of her, sharp and humorless. That your idea of a romantic vow? That's my idea of honesty. She stepped closer anyway, resting her forehead briefly against his chest. His heartbeat thudded steady under her ear, a reminder that for all his power, he was still made of flesh and bone, and just as breakable as the people she loved. Fine, she said. We do this together. But understand something, Andrew. If they come for you, they're coming for me. And if they come for me, they come for me, he finished. They stood like that for a quiet moment, rage and fear, and something like loyalty knitting themselves into a new shape. For the first time, Amy understood that the line between their fates had been erased. If one of them went down, the other went with them. And somehow, terrifyingly, that felt less like a trap and more like a choice they were both making. The conference hall had been designed to impress men who were no longer impressed by anything. Glass walls with a view of the harbor, a table big enough to hold a small war, and enough security outside the doors to start one. Captains, lieutenants, and family heads filled the seats, the low thrum of their conversations vibrating in Amy's bones. Andrew sat at the head, black suit, expression carved from stone. Amy took the chair at his right, tablet resting on the polished wood in front of her. Carlo DeLuca occupied the place of honor at Andrew's left, immaculate in navy, silver cufflinks flashing when he adjusted his papers. Victor lounged farther down, looking bored, which meant he was paying close attention. When the doors closed and the room settled, Carlo rose with a folder in hand. Gentlemen, he began, voice smooth. We're here because our revenue has dipped and our shipments have been compromised. After a thorough internal review, we've identified the source. A screen came to life at the far end of the room. Carlo clicked a remote. An image appeared, Richard Carter, caught by a grainy camera leaving a federal building. Carter Import, Carlo continued. Our gracious hosts-in-law. We've uncovered communications between Mr. Carter and a federal task force. Anonymous shell companies used to funnel product into controlled routes. In exchange for leniency, he provided them with access points into our ports. Murmurs rippled through the room. Amy felt more than saw the shift of attention toward her. Carlo clicked again. Bank statements flashed on the screen, dotted lines connecting familiar shell names. Funds from Meridian Wellness, Sunnyline Trading, and others were traced to accounts tagged in federal investigations. On paper, they implicate us. In practice, they enrich Carter and whoever he's feeding. Victor leaned in, eyebrows raised in feigned surprise. So the little accountant sold us out. Can't say I'm shocked. Carlo's gaze slid to Amy, all polite regret. We believe Mrs. Rossi may have been used, unknowingly of course, as a Trojan horse. Her insistence on digging into our books could easily be a cover for passing information to her stepfather's handlers. The room tipped. Allegations hung heavy in the air. Amy felt the weight of every stare. Andrew didn't move. Amy, he said quietly, you have something to say? Her heart hammered, but her hands were steady as she rose. Yes, she said. I do. She tapped her tablet. The screen at the end of the room shifted. Same shells, different perspective. Lines and arrows bloomed, forming a spiderweb of connections. Carlo is right about one thing, she began. Meridian, Sunnyline, Northbridge. Those shells have been bleeding money out of your businesses. But they weren't built to help the feds. They were built to help themselves. She zoomed in on a cluster of transactions. Here, 6 months ago, funds leave 3 of Andrew's fronts as consulting fees. They land in Meridian's account. From there, they move to an offshore bank in the Caymans under an entity called Orbis Holdings. Notice the signatory. She highlighted a name. Carlo DeLuca. A few men cursed softly. Carlo's jaw flexed once. These aren't federal accounts, Amy continued. They're private. No government tags, no investigation markers. They're designed to look like federal seizures if you don't know what you're looking for. But the routing numbers match a pattern used long before my stepfather ever met Andrew. She tapped again. A second map appeared, this time focusing on routes and ports. Red lines traced across the city. Now shipments, she said. Every load that was quietly skimmed, rerouted, or lost went through docks under Victor Russo's oversight. The discrepancies are small, but cumulative. Enough to stockpile product off the books while making it look like incompetence or theft from Andrew's side. Victor scoffed. You expect us to believe you pulled this out of thin air? You've been here, what, weeks? I expect you to believe in math, Amy said. These manifests come from the physical records at the docks. The handwritten notes authorizing alternate routes. She pulled up a photo, a manifest, a sticky note, a neat scrawl at the bottom. Route confirmed. Offload at Pier 7. V. Funny coincidence, she added. Same initial as our underboss. Same handwriting as 3 other adjustments. The room's temperature dropped. Carlo stepped forward, smile gone. You're cherry-picking data. Anyone could have forged my signature. Sure, Amy said. They just also need access to your private legal templates. See these phrases? She split the screen, highlighting repeated clauses across multiple filings. The shells draining Andrew's accounts, the loan that supposedly trapped my stepfather, even the marriage contract you drew up. Same language, same misplaced punctuation. People can fake signatures. They don't fake their writing tics. Someone on the far side of the table muttered, Madonna, under his breath. Amy let the silence work for a beat, then drove the knife in. They manufactured Richard's debt, she said. Carlo drafted it, Victor's routes supplied the missing product, and together they funneled the profits into their own accounts. When the time was right, they dangled my family as the perfect scapegoat. Time to look like a federal sting so you'd panic and turn on your own before you saw who was holding the strings. Victor slammed his hand on the table. This is bullshit. Then open your accounts, Amy said. Let everyone at this table see the last year of your legitimate income. I'll wait. He went very still. Across the table, 2 captains exchanged a look. Doubt had entered the room, and doubt was contagious. Carlo shifted tactics. Even if some funds pass through my filings, that doesn't prove intent. We move money every day. That's what I'm hired to do. You're taking the word of a woman whose entire family is compromised over men who have bled for you, Andrew. All eyes swung to the head of the table. Andrew hadn't moved throughout the entire exchange. Now he rose, slow and deliberate. The room quieted to the point Amy could hear her own breathing. I've been tracking communications for weeks, he said, voice deceptively calm. Encrypted calls from Carlo's office to offshore numbers. Late-night messages from Victor's ports to unregistered phones. I wanted to believe it was pressure from outside. Cops. Rivals. Anything but what it really is. He looked at Carlo first. You told me the shells were for asset protection, Andrew said. You told me Meridian was a firewall. You neglected to mention that firewall conveniently routed around me. Carlo's expression hardened. You're going to take her side over mine? After everything, I'm going to take the side of evidence, Andrew cut in. And the evidence says you've been stealing from me and setting me up to take the fall. Victor pushed back his chair. If you believe that, you're already unfit to lead. Guns appeared so quickly Amy almost missed who drew first. Chairs scraped, men shouted, the air filled with the scrape of metal. Marcus materialized at Andrew's shoulder, weapon leveled at Victor. Other guards flooded in from the edges of the room, drawn by a signal she hadn't seen. Enough, Andrew said, and he didn't raise his voice, but it cut through the chaos like a shot. He pointed at Carlo. You're done. Accounts frozen. Properties seized. You don't leave this building unless I say so. 2 of Andrew's men moved behind the consigliera. For the first time, fear cracked Carlo's composure. You won't survive this without me, Carlo hissed. You don't know half of what I know. Andrew's gaze was ice. I know enough to realize the man I trusted with my right hand has been using it to stab me in the back. He turned to Victor. As for you, you wanted my seat. You built your little treasury, stockpiled my product, and thought you could buy loyalty when the time came. Victor's eyes darted, calculating distances, exits. He didn't find any. You won't kill me here, Victor said. Too many witnesses. Andrew's smile was thin. You're right. I'm not going to kill you. A murmur of surprise. I'm exiling you, he continued. From this table, from this city, from every port with my name on it. By tomorrow, every account you control will be dust. Every ally you thought you had will know what you really are. You walk out of here with your life because I say so. What happens after that is between you and whoever you cross paths with. It was, in its own way, a harsher sentence than a bullet. Victor opened his mouth, closed it again. Self-preservation finally beat pride. He lifted his hands slowly and let the guards escort him out, jaw clenched. When the doors shut behind him and Carlo, the room was left humming with the aftershock. Men shifted, recalibrating their loyalties in real time. Andrew looked around the table, gaze sweeping every face. Anyone else stealing from me, he said, should consider tonight your only warning. You come clean now, we talk. You don't, his eyes darkened. You won't like how this ends. No one spoke. He finally sat, the tension in his shoulders easing by a fraction. Then he glanced at Amy. Mrs. Rossi, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, will be auditing all operations for the foreseeable future. Whatever she asks for, she gets. A few heads snapped her way, resentment barely concealed. She met their eyes calmly. The decision had been made. As the council dispersed, the reality settled over her. Andrew had just burned 2 pillars of his empire based on her work. If she was wrong, he'd fall. If he fell, they both would. When the room was nearly empty, he leaned toward her, voice pitched low. You were right, he said. There was no triumph in it, only grim acceptance. If you hadn't shown me that map, tonight would have gone very differently. Amy exhaled, the adrenaline finally ebbing. You sided with the woman who blew up your inner circle. That's not nothing. He held her gaze. I sided with the only person in this room who didn't lie to me. The empire he'd built was shifting beneath their feet. For better or worse, they were now standing on the same fault line. The envelope lay in the center of Andrew's desk like it might explode if she touched it. No lawyers, he said. No witnesses. Just us. Outside, the harbor moved in slow gray waves. Inside, it felt like the air had gone thin. Amy broke the seal and slid out the papers. Short for a contract. 3 pages. She read every line anyway. The first clause hit her like a physical blow. The marriage contract between Andrew Rossi and Amy Carter, dated 6 weeks prior, was void. The accompanying debt agreement, every fabricated cent tied to her stepfather's name, was marked settled in full. A final paragraph detailed a trust in her mother and brother's names. Enough money to put Daniel through any school he wanted. Enough to buy a house far from this city and never look back. At 9:17 this morning, Andrew said softly, your family became officially, legally, permanently untouchable. No one in my world can use them against you again. Not without going through me first. And I won't allow it. Her throat tightened. So that's it. I signed this and what? I'm just done. You're free. His eyes stayed on her, unblinking. You walk out of here with a new identity, enough cash and no obligations. I'll make sure no one connected to me comes near your family. Not for protection. Not for revenge. Nothing. And you? She asked. He smiled without humor. I go back to being exactly what I was before you walked into that conference room with a forged contract in your hand. A man surrounded by people who fear him, obey him, and lie to him. The words sat between them, raw and heavy. She signed. Her hand shook a little, but she signed every page. Amy Carter here. Amy Rossi there. The name she'd worn like a shackle becoming, finally, just ink on paper. When it was done, he gathered the documents, stacked them with care, and locked them away. You don't owe me anything now, he said. Not loyalty. Not gratitude. Not your life. If you stay, it's because you choose the fire, Amy. Not because I dragged you into it. She left that afternoon. Marcus drove her to a quiet street far from the harbor, where her mother waited on a sun-faded porch with Daniel's old basketball rolling against the step. The safe house looked nothing like the hospital room where they'd almost taken her. It looked like a place where nothing bad had ever happened and nothing ever would. Her mother hugged her so hard it hurt. Daniel tried to act cool, failed, and wrapped his arms around both of them. There was laughter, shaky, disbelieving, when Amy told them the debt was gone. Real smiles when she handed over the papers confirming the trust. They talked about schools and jobs in cities where no one knew the name Rossi. Her mother's eyes shone with relief. Daniel listed places he wanted to go like a kid reading off a wish list. It should have felt like victory. That night, lying on a borrowed bed under a quiet ceiling fan, Amy stared at the darkness and realized why it didn't. She'd come here to be the girl she used to be. The one who kept her head down and her spreadsheets perfect, who believed safety meant staying small. But that girl was gone. Somewhere between the forged marriage and the sit-down where she'd dismantled a coup with a few dozen transactions and a courage she hadn't known she had, something inside her had caught fire. Walking away from Andrew's world didn't put it out. It just meant burning alone. She lasted 3 days. On the 4th, she found herself standing in front of the building that wasn't on any registry, heart hammering as security confirmed her name and led her upstairs. The penthouse looked the same, glass, steel, the city spread beneath it. But she didn't feel like the same woman who'd first walked in clutching a contract. Andrew was in the study, jacket off, sleeves rolled, reviewing something on his screen. He looked up when she stepped inside. For one heartbeat, shock flickered over his face before he locked it down. "You're supposed to be on a beach somewhere," he said. "Give me time," she replied. "I like to ease into cliches." He watched her cross the room. She stopped on the far side of his desk, not sitting, not asking. "You're free," he reminded her. "You don't need anything from me now." "That's the problem," she said. "I don't need you. I want you." The words hung there, dangerous and honest. "Your empire is still bleeding," she went on. "You cut out the worst tumors, but the system that let them grow is still in place. You need someone watching the numbers, rewriting the rules so no one can weaponize them again. And she laughed quietly. "I need something I can't get in a quiet job with a polite boss." "What's that?" he asked. "A seat at the table," she said. "Not as collateral. Not as your shield. As your partner." His gaze sharpened. "You're proposing a merger." "I'm proposing a new contract," she corrected. "No debt clauses. No threats. We keep the marriage if we want it, but the terms change. I take official control of the legitimate fronts and the books behind them. You handle the parts that require guns and creative consequences. We consult, we argue, we split decisions that affect both sides. And if we disagree?" he asked. "Then we fight," she said simply. "Behind closed doors. But when we walk out in front of them, we're united. Always." He studied her, slow and searching, like she was another ledger he couldn't quite balance. "And if I say no?" he asked. "Then I walk," she said. "For real this time. I build my own life, my own empire, somewhere you'll never see. But you'll still have my system upgrades. You'll still be harder to steal from. Call it my severance gift." Silence stretched. The harbor lights blinked. Somewhere deep in the building, a door clicked shut. Finally, Andrew reached into a drawer, pulled out a blank sheet of heavy paper, and laid it between them. "Speak," he said. "Your terms." She did. This time, she wrote some of them herself. Months later, Amy sat beside him at the head of a different table. This one lined with accountants, lawyers, and executives from legitimate companies that now fed into their cleaned-up fronts. Contracts slid across the polished wood. She reviewed, amended, signed. Behind the walls, quiet systems she designed monitored every transfer, every shipment, every signature for the slightest hint of the rot that had almost taken them down. Once, a junior partner joked that the new compliance protocols were overkill. Marcus, standing near the door, just smiled and said it was cheaper than betrayal. When the meeting ended, Andrew leaned close, his hand brushing hers under the table. "No performance now, just habit." "Everything clear?" he asked. "Cleaner than it's ever been," she said. "If anyone tries to run what Carlo and Victor did, the alarms will scream before they finish their first transfer." "And you," he murmured. "Any regrets?" Amy looked out at the city, at the docks where money moved and deals were made, at the world she'd once thought belonged only to men like him. Her world now, too. "I stepped into the fire," she said. "I thought it would destroy me. Instead, it taught me how to burn without disappearing." She turned back to him, a slow smile touching her mouth. "Regrets," she repeated. "Only that I didn't ask for a bigger percentage." He laughed, low and genuine, and slid a folder toward her. "Negotiate it," he said. "Partner." The girl who'd once been forced into a mafia marriage sat straighter in her chair, pen poised over terms she'd written herself. The flames of this life still burned hot and dangerous. But now, when they moved around her. Not consuming. Obeying.